The moment my daughter-in-law slid the paper across the kitchen table and said, "Just sign it, Dorothy. It's easier this way," I understood that the war had already begun. I simply had not been told. I had been standing by the stove, the way I always did on Sunday mornings, stirring oatmeal and listening to the birds settle into the oak tree outside the window. It was the kind of morning I had earned. 31 years at Southwestern Federal, the last 12 as a senior loan officer had taught me that quiet mornings were not accidents. They were the result of decades of careful choices. I had chosen well. My house in San Antonio was paid off. My retirement account was healthy. My name was the only one on every document that mattered. Then my daughter-in-law, Melissa, pulled out a manila folder. She set it on the table the way people do when they believe the conversation is already over. Casually, with a small smile that had nothing warm inside it. "It's a financial power of attorney," she said. "Standard in case something happens to you." I looked down at the paper. I did not touch it. In 31 years of reviewing loan documents, I had learned that the contracts people call standard are usually the ones that need the most reading. "Something like what?" I asked. "You know," she waved her hand gently. "You're not getting younger, Dorothy. Marcus and I just want to make sure we can help if you ever can't handle things yourself." My son Marcus was not in the room. He was in the backyard with the garden hose, doing what he had always done when Melissa had a plan, staying close enough to hear, far enough to claim he hadn't. I folded the paper back into the folder, slid it across the table to her side, and said, "I'll look at it later." She picked it up without expression, but something shifted in the air between us. The kind of shift you only recognize after 30 years of watching people react when a loan gets denied. I turned back to the oatmeal and listened to the birds. That was a Tuesday in September. By Thursday, I had already called Patricia Hines. Patricia and I had worked across the hall from each other for 11 years before she left the bank to open her own estate planning office on the north side of town. We were not close in the way people mean when they use that word loosely, but we were the kind of close that matters more. We respected each other's intelligence. We did not speak unless we had something worth saying. She answered on the second ring. "Dorothy," her voice was even professional, the way it always had been. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "Something landed on my kitchen table," I said, "and I need someone who will tell me the truth about what it means." A pause, short but careful. "Bring it in." I drove to her office the next morning, with the folder tucked in my bag. I had not mentioned my plans to Marcus or Melissa. I had made coffee, said good morning, and left before anyone had questions. Patricia read the document once, then again, more slowly. She set it down with both hands flat on the desk. "Where did they get this?" she asked. "Printed it themselves, I guess. This isn't notarized." "And the scope is extremely broad." She tapped the page. "If you sign this, Dorothy, Melissa would have the authority to access your accounts, make financial decisions on your behalf, and in certain interpretations, manage or transfer your real property." I looked at her steadily. "My house, potentially, depending on how it was used." I sat with that for a moment. Outside, a truck rumbled past the window. The ceiling fan overhead moved slowly, barely stirring the air. "I've been living with me for 14 months, I said. "No rent, no utilities, no contribution to the grocery bill. My son says they're saving for their own place." Patricia's expression did not change. "Have you seen any evidence of that?" "That's the other reason I'm here." Shy reached into my bag again and placed 3 months of bank statements on the desk. "Not mine, theirs." Marcus still used the joint account we had opened together years ago when his father first got sick, and I needed someone to run errands and pay bills during the hard weeks. I had never closed it. I had never needed to until now. Patricia studied the statements quietly. She was the kind of woman who didn't react until she was finished reading. "There's nothing accumulating here," she said finally. "Deposits come in and go out within days. Restaurant charges, subscriptions, clothing, and these." She pointed to a series of transfers I had noticed myself. "Small amounts consistent every 2 weeks to an account I didn't recognize. I don't know whose that is," I said. "Would you like to?" Yes, I drove home in the same careful quiet I had carried all morning. Marcus's truck was gone from the driveway. Melissa's car sat in the garage, which meant she was home. I went in through the back door the way I always did, set my bag on the kitchen counter, and started making lunch as if nothing had changed. Because nothing had yet, I was still gathering. The house had always been mine in the way that some things simply are. My husband, Gerald, and I had bought it the year Marcus turned 3. Gerald passed 9 years later. A heart attack on a Wednesday morning, so sudden that the coffee he had poured was still warm when I found him. I raised Marcus in this house. I repainted every room twice. I planted the oak tree in the backyard myself. Hauled the sapling in the back seat of my car because the nursery didn't deliver. After Marcus married Melissa, they lived in an apartment across town. That was fine. That was how it should be. Then Marcus's company downsized. Then Melissa quit her job, which she described as a personal decision, and which I learned later had not been voluntary. Then the apartment lease ended, and Marcus called on a Sunday evening with a voice I recognized. The voice of a man who needs something and is hoping the love between them will make the asking easier. "Just until we get back on our feet, Mom." 3 months, maybe 4, 14 months later, Melissa was sliding papers across my kitchen table. I did not sleep much those first 2 nights after meeting with Patricia. Not from fear, from thinking. I had spent 3 decades helping people understand what they were signing, what they were agreeing to, what they were giving away without realizing it. I had been patient and thorough and careful on behalf of strangers. It had not occurred to me that I would one day need to be equally careful on behalf of myself. That oversight was mine. I acknowledged it without guilt and moved on. Patricia called on a Friday morning the account those transfers are going to. She said it's in Melissa's name only. Opened 8 months ago. I wrote down the number she gave me. I thanked her. I hung up. I had stopped being surprised by this particular kind of arithmetic 2 days ago. What I felt instead was the same feeling I used to get in the final hour before a difficult client meeting. Focused, precise, ready. Wedgie, I spent the weekend making calls I should have made months earlier. I had let patience become passivity. That was over now. On Monday, I walked into my branch and sat down with the branch manager, a young woman named Claire, who had been there 5 years and knew my name when I walked through the door. I closed the joint account, changed the passwords and security contacts on every account I held. I set up alerts for any access attempt on my investment accounts, and I had a brief, clear conversation with Claire about what my concerns were and what I needed documented. She listened without interrupting. She wrote everything down. "Is there anything else?" she asked when I finished. "Yes," I said. "I need to speak with someone about updating my estate documents." "Everything currently in place needs to be reviewed." She nodded and picked up the phone. On Tuesday morning, when Marcus went to log into the account he had used for 14 months, the access was gone. He called me from the driveway. I could hear him through the kitchen window before I answered, "Mom." His voice was tighter than usual, not angry, confused. "The account isn't showing up." "I closed it," I said. "I should have done it sooner." A pause. "Can we talk about this when I get home tonight?" Of course. What I did not tell him was that by the time he got home, a woman named Janet Pwitt from the elder law firm, 2 blocks from Patricia's office, would have already delivered a document to the house. Not for Melissa. For both of them, a formal notice of occupancy status and a request to begin transition planning within 30 days. I was not there when Janet rang the bell. I had gone to a diner 3 miles away and ordered coffee and a slice of lemon pie and read the novel I had been meaning to finish since spring. My phone rang while I was on the second chapter, Marcus. I let it go to voicemail, then Melissa, then Marcus again. I finished the chapter before I called back. Mom, there is a woman here with legal papers. Marcus's voice had changed from confused to something thinner. Scared. I know, I said. What does this mean, 30 days? It means what it says, Mom. Marcus. I set the novel down on the table and spoke the way I used to when a client needed to stop talking and start listening. I know about the account Melissa has been transferring money into. I know about the power of attorney document she asked me to sign. I know that there is nothing in your finances that suggests you have been saving for anything. And I know that my name is on this house and only my name. The silence on his end lasted longer than I expected. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Long enough. Another silence, and then so faintly I almost missed it. He said, I'm sorry, Mom. I did not respond immediately. I looked out the window of the diner at the parking lot in the strip of sky above the roofline. Clear and pale, the particular blue that October gets in Texas when the heat finally decides to relent. I know you are, I said. Well, talk tonight. I drove back to the house at 5. Melissa's car was gone. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with the legal papers spread out in front of him, and his hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. He looked like my son again. The version from before Melissa had made him small. I made fresh coffee without being asked. I set a mug in front of him and sat down across from him and let the silence hold us for a moment. She said you were getting older, he started. That we should be managing things before they got complicated. She said you wouldn't mind. She never asked me. I said, I know. He pressed his hands flat on the table. I told myself it was practical. I told myself a lot of things. Where is she now? She left. She's been calling me, but I haven't answered. I looked at my son, 50 years old, gray at his temples now, the same as his father had been at that age. He had his father's hands, wide and careful, but he had not always used them carefully. I need you to understand something, I said. This house has been mine since your father and I carried you through that front door. The oak tree in that yard has my name on it as much as any deed does. I allowed you and Melissa to live here because you asked, and I love you. That was my choice to make. What Melissa tried to do took that choice away from me without my knowledge. Marcus nodded slowly. His eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. The 30 days, he said. Does that apply to me too? I considered the question honestly. That depends on what you decide. He was quiet for a long time. I think I've known for a while, he said finally, that something was wrong. I just didn't want to see it. I know. She told me you were confused sometimes, that you mixed up your accounts, that you needed help. He felt something cold pass through me, brief and bright, like a flashlight beam across a dark room. And you believed her? He closed his eyes. I wanted to. It was easier. I stood up and poured myself more coffee and stood by the window for a moment. The oak tree was dark against the evening sky. A single bird settled into the upper branches and then was still. Marcus, I said, without turning around. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years deciding whether people were credit-worthy based on nothing but paper and pattern. I know what confusion looks like. I also know what manipulation looks like. I am not confused. I turned to face him. The question now is what you are going to do. The next morning, Marcus called Melissa. He did not listen from the other room. I went outside and watered the garden and let the conversation be theirs. When he came outside 40 minutes later, his face was quieter than I had seen it in a long time. The kind of quiet that follows a long overdue decision. She's staying with her sister, he said. Okay, I don't think I want to follow her there. I said nothing. I handed him the garden hose and pointed to the tomatoes that needed water. He watered them without saying anything else for a while. Over the following 2 weeks, things clarified themselves the way they do when the noise stops and only the facts remain. Melissa had, through her transfers, accumulated just over $11,000 in the private account. My attorney sent a formal letter requesting the return of any funds that had originated from shared household expenses covered by me during their stay. Melissa's response filtered through a lawyer. My attorney was not surprised, neither was I. What happened next was quieter than I expected. No shouting, no confrontation at the door, just a deposition scheduled, documents subpoenaed, and Melissa's lawyer's tone shifting perceptibly between the first communication and the third. On a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the notice was delivered, 11,200 appeared in my account. No note, no call. Patricia sent me a single text. Arithmetic wins again. I sent back one word. Always. Marcus moved into an apartment on the east side of town before the 30 days were up. He did not ask for help with the deposit, but I drove with him to look at the place. It was small and clean with a window that faced a courtyard where someone had planted rosemary along the walkway. It's not much, he said. It's yours, I said. He nodded slowly. The way people do when they're beginning to understand what that means. He asked me once during those weeks whether I blamed him. We were sitting on the porch in the early evening with glasses of sweet tea, watching the neighborhood settle into itself after the heat of the day. I blame the choices, I said, not always the person. That sounds like something a banker would say. It is something a banker would say. I looked at him, and it's also something a mother would say. He was quiet for a moment. A car passed on the street, music drifting out the open windows, and then gone. I was so relieved when she handled things, he said. I thought it meant I didn't have to. I know. She told me what to think about a lot of things, including you. I know that too. Were you afraid? He asked. When you found out, I thought about it honestly before answering. No. I said I was paying attention. There's a difference. He filed for separation 6 weeks later. I did not tell him to. I did not tell him not to. He called me the night after he met with his attorney, and he sounded the way Marcus had sounded at 22 when he had just done something difficult and was surprised to find he was still standing. How do people do this? He asked. The same way they do everything hard, I said. One document at a time, he laughed. It sounded like him. On a Saturday in November, I rearranged the spare bedroom. I moved the dresser back to where I had always wanted it, against the south wall where the morning light fell. I replaced the curtains with the ones I had kept folded in the closet, a pale yellow that Gerald had picked out years ago, and that Melissa had said looked old-fashioned. I put his photograph back on the nightstand. I opened the window. That afternoon, I called 3 women from my church and my former colleague, Rosalind, from the bank, and asked them to come for coffee on Sunday. No particular reason, just coffee. They arrived with the particular energy of women who have earned their age and are no longer embarrassed by it. We sat in the living room with mugs and a plate of the walnut cookies I had made that morning, and it was Rosalind who brought it up first, the way she always did with the things people were thinking but not saying. My daughter wants to add her name to my deed, she said. She says it simplifies things. I looked at her over my mug. Does it simplify things for you or for her? Rosalind tilted her head. She says it's the same thing. It isn't. The room was quiet in the way rooms get when something true has just been said. A deed with your name on it belongs to you, I continued. A deed with 2 names on it belongs to a negotiation. If you want to leave your daughter the house when you go, write a will. While you are here, the house stays yours. Your accounts stay yours. Your decisions stay yours. Sue. Anyone who tells you otherwise is simplifying something for themselves. Rosalind set her mug down thoughtfully. How do you know when help is actually help? Help doesn't require your signature. I said, help doesn't need access to your accounts, and help doesn't get angry when you say no. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. By the time they left, 3 of them had names and phone numbers tucked into their purses. Patricia's and the estate attorney's down the street. I had made the calls that morning to let both offices know to expect them. And compediations and a came per. Marcus came by that evening, not with problems, just to bring the leftover casserole he had made too much of, and to sit in the kitchen for an hour while I told him about the afternoon. You organized a meeting, he said, smiling a little. I had coffee with friends. You handed out lawyer referrals. Coffee and referrals, I said. It's a perfectly normal Sunday. He shook his head. But it was the fond kind, the kind that knows you and accepts you. When he left, I stood in the living room and looked at the space around me. The room held the particular quiet of a house that knows it belongs to someone. No tension in the corners, no doors positioned for escape. The yellow curtains in the hallway caught the last of the evening light and glowed gently, just as Gerald had imagined they would when he chose that color all those years ago. I sat down in my chair by the window, the one with the view of the oak tree and the stretch of street beyond the gate, and I thought about what I would say to anyone listening. Here is what I know and what I want you to hear. There is a difference between loving someone and funding their deception. There is a difference between keeping the peace and erasing yourself to preserve someone else's comfort. I spent 14 months doing the second of those things while telling myself it was the first. That was my mistake, and it was mine to correct. The people who take advantage of patience do so because patience has no expiration date stamped on it. They believe you will extend it indefinitely. The moment you don't, the moment you produce a document instead of an excuse, you reveal that the patience was always a choice and that you have made a different one. I am 67 years old. I know the difference between a contract and a favor. I know the difference between help and dependency. I know what it costs to maintain affliction, and I know exactly when the cost becomes too high. Your name on a deed is not vanity. It is not selfishness. It is clarity. It is the one piece of paper that says in plain language who has the right to choose what happens inside these walls. Hold on to it. Understand it. Do not sign it away because someone called it simpler, and if you are sitting in your house right now feeling smaller than the square footage you own, hear me when I say this. You are allowed to take up your full space. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to hand a document to someone who thought they understood the situation and watch their expression when they realized they did not. You worked for this. You stayed when it was hard, and you built when it was uncertain, and you kept the lights on when no one else was going to. The house is yours. Act like it. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of this story stayed with you, and where are you watching from?